They are still moving at pretty much the same pace as they did before. So some parts of the market, some dealers, they might say, actually, we're doing great. We don't recognize this downturn that you're talking about.
The middle market in particular, because it's really the blue chips that might be experiencing this more. I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from Artnet News. We're back with our monthly Art Angle Roundup, where we parse some of the big headlines that are coming through the pipeline every month. I'm really excited today to be joined by our newly announced editor-in-chief, Naomi Rea. Hey, Naomi.
Hi, Kate.
Congratulations on your new title. We're so excited to have you at the helm. And with my co-host, Ben Davis. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Kate.
Naomi, you and I were just in Paris together the week before last, and we're going to talk about the state of the art market today on the backs of two big fairs in Europe, Frieze London and Art Basel Paris. And first, before that, we're going to get into a big sentencing that was just slammed down in London over the souping of a very famous Vincent van Gogh painting. And we're also going to talk about the man of many controversies, Elon Musk. His latest butting up against the art world story is that he is being sued by the producers of Blade Runner over alleged plagiarism. So wide-ranging stories covering a lot of the globe. But first, let's just talk about some things that we've been up to lately. Naomi, you and I were just in Paris together, as I just said, and we were perusing around a very excellent surrealism show. Have you had some more time to think about that exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, it was an impressive show. Trust the French to do something not by halves. So many impressive loans, and I'm sure the insurance on that show was, I mean, it's such a journalist thing to be interested about, but I'm sure it was astronomical. Good on the French state for footing that. Not super digestible, I think. I only spent a couple of hours there with you. I think you could go back 100 times and sort of focus in on different things there. But I think for me, what stood out the most was Dorothea Tanning. I think she was the star of the show. There were some incredible works, incredibly famous works by Magritte and Max Ernst in this exhibition. But I think every time I found myself kind of pausing and looking back and sort of being wowed was a work by Dorothea Tanning. I don't think we or the art world has sung her praises enough. She's just got this fascinating story, 70-year career of painting, writing, sculpture, and her biography is pretty fascinating. I mean, there's this self-portrait of her I think it's sort of like midway through the show. It's famous self-portrait. It sort of stops you in your tracks. It's her standing in front of a door that's ajar. She's half naked, sort of semi-nude from the waist up, and on her bottom she has this elaborate sort of garment that it's kind of looks like branches and bits of nature. But if you look closely, these branches are kind of female bodily forms. Behind her, that door that's ajar leads out to a corridor, and it's kind of endless corridor of open doors, and it's this completely like enthralling painting. There's also this small kind of chimeric creature sat at her feet. It's that portrait actually that caught the attention of Max Ernst, and I think he approached Dorothea Tanning because he was so fascinated by it. Obviously, Max Ernst and Dorothea Tanning subsequently ended up getting married.
Extraordinary portrait, yeah.
She's a totally fascinating character.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, and you said something to me when we were walking away from that piece, which is this complete installation that you kind of look in. It's a hotel room covered in textiles. And you were like, where is that blockbuster Dorothea Tanning retrospective? It is overdue.
I did say that. And then I remembered sort of subsequently that there was an exhibition at Tate Modern in London in 2019. And that installation was in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know this piece. What is it?
So in the 1960s, Dorothea Tanning, who had been painting up until then, started making sort of stuffed sculpture figures. She describes the Hotel du Pavot as her most surrealist work. It's this kind of immersive installation with sort of soft sort of sculptures that evoke female body parts kind of ripping through the wallpaper of a hotel room. It's this kind of gothic and weird and twisted kind of dark piece. And I thought that like the sort of pregnant bellies kind of surging through the walls of the room, breaking up the wallpaper, which I thought was a kind of nice bookend to something that she famously said about her small hometown in Illinois, where nothing happened but the wallpaper. Just fantastic, really.
It was an incredible show. Yeah. So Surrealism is celebrating, or it's coming to the end of its 100th year anniversary this year. So there's been like tons of shows all over the world.
I think the manifesto was October 100 years ago. So it's like the literal anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a really beautiful exhibition, and I feel like it did a really good job of like demystifying and mystifying surrealism at once, which feels very much like on theme with surrealism.
on brand, yeah.
For sure. Like the show was organized in like a spiral, which is apparently inspired by Marcel Duchamp's idea for an exhibition. And then I was like, wait, Marcel Duchamp's exhibitions, and was looking at some of them. And he also like covered a whole exhibition in like twine, which they didn't have. So a future surrealism exhibition should do that.
Fun fact, I think our colleague, Andrew Russeth, got his start running his own blog back in the blog days called 16 Miles of String, named after that Duchamp installation. So
Indeed.
Important influence even on some of the figures working today.
You didn't make it to Paris, Ben, and I've missed you there. But what did you do in New York the past few weeks?
Oh, I've been bobbing around New York trying to stay on top of it all. I guess big things for me. Kate, in a previous chat about the things we were looking forward to, I can report back from a couple of them. I mean, Min Chen, our colleague, said she was really looking forward to Robert Frank at the Museum of Modern Art, a show of the great American photographer's late work. I have a review of that. It's an interesting show. It's not what you expect or not what I associate with his work, but really moved me in an unexpected way. And then the big things I was looking forward to was the Siena show. Siena, the Birth of Painting. Late medieval, early Renaissance art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I have a review of that. That show's spectacular. I think the consensus is it's an incredible show.
It like really feels unprecedented, and like it will never secure that kind of a loan situation again, right?
Its power has reached all the way to Germany.
I mean, I read your articles.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, it's extraordinary. You know, the Duccio is one of the stars of the show. I think it's probably the biggest collection of his pieces that'll ever be seen in one place, and reuniting his very famous altarpiece that has kind of been chopped up over time and sold off piecemeal. And some years ago, at the Frick, I had written an article that was just about one of those panels, you know, an entire article just staring at the panel, trying to figure it out, and a bunch of them together, and just a joy to see. And the art is like alien. I mean, that's what I love about it, is that it's like, the point of my article is that it just really feels otherworldly, like it's from a whole other way of thinking about art. My only quibble is that it's called The Rise of Painting, which kind of makes the case for it as like the prehistory or the Renaissance. And I'm like, no, what's great about this is that it's like totally other thing, you know? It's like the painting's all still part of the architecture, and it's not quite the way we think about art. This very tactile experience of art. It's just mind expanding.
Nice.
And very precious feeling, you know. Of course, it's like all these gold leaf, intricate little devotional paintings.
One might say decorative, which is, you know, widely considered a bit of an insult if you talk about painting today.
True.
Well, speaking of precious art, I think we should probably start talking about the headline of the fall coming out of London, which was the sentencing of the Just Stop Oil activists that had thrown some soup on a painting.
Yeah. I like that you used a souping as a verb in the introduction at the top, and I was like, oh man, that's a verb that
all the kids are saying it. All the kids are saying it. Naomi, what happened with this story?
I don't know if we need to refresh people's memory who don't remember this. I mean, it was a pretty viral moment in 2022, already 2 years ago, when a couple of activists from Just Stop Oil threw 2 cans of Heinz tomato soup over Van Gogh's sunflowers at London's National Gallery. Their aim was to create a media shockwave that would demand urgent attention to the fossil fuel crisis. And I think if we're just talking amongst us, that worked. It grabbed headlines worldwide and I think split the public on it. I think some people, especially young people who are very invested in the climate cause, admired the boldness of the act. But art historians and preservationists, I think, felt a deep unease at seeing this kind of sort of protest playing out in front of our cultural heritage. It raised a question about the boundaries of protest and the protection of our shared heritage. And since it has inspired countless copycats, copycat soupings, copycat mashed potato throwings, copycat gluings at museums around the world. So fast forward to this past July when the original soup throwers, who are both young people in their early 20s, were convicted by a jury of criminal damage. And then the most recent, or sort of leading up till now, just at the end of last month, on September 27th, our colleague Joe Lawson-Tancred was reporting on the sentencing, and they received hefty sentences. So one of them got 2 years and the other got 20 months in jail.
Wow.
Severe penalty, especially considering that the painting itself wasn't damaged. They'd chosen it sort of specifically because it was encased in a protective glass panel. But the prosecutors based the argument on the possible harm that could have been caused to the frame of the painting. It was a historic frame, 17th century, although worth noting that no actual restoration was needed of the frame. So
Right.
harsh, in my opinion. I don't know. Kate, what do you think of the sentencing? Fair?
It seems harsh, in my opinion. And that being said, I don't necessarily condone throwing things at historic art, but it seems like people doing way worse things get off with less. I mean, I assume they got a fair trial, but it's definitely striking news to see those. And it seems to me like an example is being made, but then there was a protest souping of souping sentencing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of somewhat of an ingenious twist, because if you sort of think about it, and I think you've said it, it's what I imagine might have been going through the mind of the judge in doling out such a harsh sentence as a sort of example setting. I think sort of hours after that, as you say, 3 other protesters came in, threw soup on the same painting and another sunflowers painting that was on view in the National Gallery's Van Gogh show. And I think it sort of moots that argument that like, oh, this will bring an end to a cycle in quite a smart way, I think.
Yeah, maybe like they should opt for like discourse or something over like sentencing and charging people. Ben, what do you think?
Oh, I think that there's no good thing to say about this. I have a lot of sympathy for the protesters, really. This is the great issue of our time, and they're trying to move the needle on it. In terms of public discourse, I have a lot of questions about whether this tactic works and whether it doesn't backfire, essentially. But in the absence of any concrete forward movement on, to turn things around in terms of the climate, I mean, I think we can just expect more and more of this. And the sympathizers, the protesters who did their sympathy souping at the Van Gogh Poets and Lovers show, one of them said, future generations will regard these prisoners of conscience to be on the right side of history. And to the extent that the people who did something to act will be remembered well, I think that's true. On the other hand, I just don't know where these wave of protests are going.
I have a question for you, Ben, as an art critic. So ahead of the sentencing, there was an open letter that was signed by a lot of people in the art world. And I think it was the origins, signed by Greenpeace, but many people in the art world signed it as well, that framed the act of the original souping of the Van Gogh painting as a work of art itself in the lineage of avant-garde practices like Robert Rauschenberg famously erasing a de Kooning as a statement or an effort to explore whether art could be created through erasure. So let me ask you, where do you draw the line between protest as a disruptive force and art in its own right?
That I can be categorical about. I think that letter's terrible. I think it's the exact wrong way to go in defending these young people. Taking a stand, I think reframing it as art, as an artistic gesture. I mean, even I think in the spirit of kind of trying to downplay the severity of what they did in order to, argue for a lighter sentence, it points the conversation in the wrong way into an argument over, is this art? And can it be contextualized in art? And not the real arguments that I think are important. And furthermore, look, one of the dynamics here is I think that Just Stop Oil has tried other forms of protest, including barricading roads, blockading power plants. And that doesn't get the attention that these kinds of art protests do, because they're shocking and weird and they're upsetting. And that is the reality. And they make a good photo. They're art-like, They appear in a space of images, but that's a good and a bad thing. You get the press, but at the cost of being conceived of as this kind of novelty spectacle, and reframing the question as we need to shock the public awake. I wrote an article about this 2 years ago. during the first wave of soup attacks. I think there are plenty of people who are aware of the severity of climate change who have a lot of questions about what it means to do something or whether things are too late. And I just wish the conversation was less about, is this art, and more about some of those concrete questions that would move people closer. And I think this whole negative spiral of spectacle and punishment unfortunately puts the conversation in the wrong direction.
I agree with you. I preferred their argument that they had made before about the history of protest activism. Like Phoebe Plummer in one of the press photos from the summer has this tote bag on and it says, women didn't get the vote by voting, you know? And that's like a clear reference to Mary Richardson, who slashed the Velasquez painting in London. She was a suffragette. I think that history is more relevant to their protest than sort of like invoking Rauschenberg. And also, it feels like the main takeaway, Naomi, is also like, you just can't bring your bag into the museum anymore, right? Like, what are the consequences for the public in that sense?
Oh, yeah, there was a whole other thing with the museum directors responding to it, right?
Well, so museum directors wrote a letter finally inviting Just Stop Oil and other activists to a table to discuss. But I think the threat is essentially, I mean, museum directors are saying, we can't handle this. You know, we cannot handle people coming in repeatedly and staging these spectacles in our museums. And the consequence for that will be that we are going to have to erect further barriers between the public and the artworks, and sort of trying to get the argument there that, look, if you continue doing this, no one's going to be able to see art from within 10 feet. National Gallery specifically has introduced a liquids ban, so you can no longer bring in any liquids to the gallery.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably is a feature that we're looking at, is that museums will be more and more like airports, where it wasn't always the case that you had to go through extensive layers of security to get to your gate. Those movies from the 70s or something where people chase their partner to the gate to call them back at the end of some kind of romantic comedy. It's not what happens anymore. And I think that's probably the near future, if it's not already now.
Yeah, not in Paris, though. Like, the Surrealism show was so full of people and there were so many bags. And at one point, a security guard tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, Madame, like, your bag. And I thought he was going to make me check it. But he's like, just put it on your stomachs, like, not on your back. And so then I was walking around with my bag on my stomach. Like, I'd have easier access to my soup if I was a protester.
Think of the insurance. Think of the insurance. Yeah. A final thing. I don't know what moves the needle on the climate change conversation. And I did, for what it's worth, look at the Google trend lines on this story. You can see how it compares in terms of public interest to the 2022 one, and it hasn't cracked that level. Like, this is a big story for us because it's art, and it was one of the big stories of the last month. But you can literally see in the data how, like, you need a stronger hit of drugs each time in order to get the same high. It hasn't cracked the level of attention they got the previous time. And if you compare it to searches for Just Stop Oil, to searches for Lego Van Gogh, you know, the first protest was much more viral than Lego Van Gogh. And then for a long period, Lego Van Gogh is much more searched. And this briefly cracks that. And the public is now back to thinking about Van Gogh in terms of Legos and not in terms of soup.
We know more than anyone as journalists that it's hard to keep something in the public eye. I mean, think about what happened to NFTs. It's maybe time for the activists to find a new viral strategy.
Well, yeah, but gosh, what is that? I mean, God knows.
Yeah, well, the newest news on this front actually is that last Friday, there was an action at the British Museum where protesters dressed up a statue of the Greek goddess Demeter with one of these like high-vis vests and a placard that says "Just Stop Famine," Demeter being the god of harvest and agriculture. And then on Monday, there was another thing, actually. 3 Just Stop Oil protesters who are awaiting trial for allegedly throwing soup at 2 Vincent van Gogh paintings at the National Gallery, which is a different protest incident than the one we were just talking about. They've actually been banned from protesting in London while they wait for trial in January 2026. So, you know, I'm sure there'll be more to come on this.
Sure.
Well, there were no climate protests in Paris at the Grand Palais, where Art Basel Paris took place just under 2 weeks ago, though there was a pro-Palestine protest that took place on the Sunday of the fair. When it comes to the art market, though, the mood was extremely sunny. Actually, the weather was very sunny, so much so that VIPs were milling around wearing sunglasses the entire VIP day, which was like quite funny for like avoiding eye contact and these kinds of things. But it was exceptionally necessary because this beautiful building that the sun was just like beating down in there. And yeah, the mood of brightness like transferred to dealers. They were really happy at the fair from everything we heard. At least that was my impression from what I heard too. And this was coming off the back of Frieze London, where it also seemed that people had expected the worst and came out like relatively unscathed. You know, you can't really beat the venue of the Grand Palais, this beautiful greenhouse that was like purpose built for an art fair. So it just looks so good. Like 50% of the photos you see are of the like venue and 50% is of the art. It's just like absolutely magnificent. But it seemed like a really successful fair overall. That said, the market is not what it used to be. I'm curious, Naomi, like how you've been digesting the fair after about a week and a half since.
Yeah, I think definitely the mood at the fair was completely different. The market mood at the fair was different to Frieze London. I think Frieze London was buzzing. There was a lot of attendance. I think Frieze London has a kind of like social scene around it that people were in the aisles and stuff. It felt much more like a social occasion than Art Basel Paris, where, you know, you can hear people in the aisles talking about picking out a work for their salon. People were definitely sort of actively shopping for art in a way that I didn't see in Frieze London. So, you know, from that perspective, the vibe definitely felt more positive.
It's so funny, like also the celebrity thing at Frieze, like there's so many famous people go there and they're really like proud of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that celebrities are buying art for their couch.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like British celebrities, or not necessarily like mainstream celebrities, like of course, you know, Sienna Miller was there, very exciting. But, you know, Art Basel Paris had Natalie Portman and Owen Wilson. I feel like they win on that front too.
And a bunch of high-powered art advisors and collectors, which were, to be fair, at Frieze as well. I'm curious, Naomi, like this narrative of like pitting these two fairs against each other across the English Channel, is it fair? Is it unfair? What do you think about that?
I'm certainly bored of the narrative of London versus Paris. It's something that we've been talking about for 8 years since the Brexit vote. And I think Paris has certainly experienced a renaissance in its art scene. It's had a lot of big galleries who've moved to set up shop in the capital there. I think it's an easier entry point to the EU because for import tax reasons, the UK used to be the entry point and now it's Paris. So it's been useful to a lot of galleries to sort of open up some sort of office or space in Paris for it to serve as the entry point to the European Union. But I think as far as the market goes, Paris is not yet competing with London in terms of volume of transactions. And I think London still has a very strong position in the global art market, both geographically, working language is English, which is very widely spoken. I think Paris is definitely having a renaissance, but I don't think it's really fair to pit it against London. I don't think London's going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And if you talk to collectors, that's not what they're saying either. Like I did an interview with Alex Moore from Moore Charpentier, and he was saying the diversity of collectors that live in London is just really an important aspect of the enduring power of the market there. And while all these galleries, as you say, have been opening in Paris, the collectors have not been like moving to Paris. People love to visit Paris. And I think that this thing that we were hearing a lot around Basel in June, the Swiss Marquis Fair that is every year in June, and also throughout the summer that people are quote unquote saving for Paris turned out to be quite true because like people really like showed up this year, but they're not living there, they're visiting. And that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the longer term of like the longevity of some of these big galleries that have moved there. Like what happens during the rest of the year?
Can I ask a question about the whole experience of covering it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking in from the outside and there's this kind of trade paper aspect of Artnet News trying to figure out how the business of art is going. And it seems like people are very irritated about the negative coverage that Artnet News in particular has had of the art market in the last year, talking about the difficult state of art sales. It seems like that coverage has really made a mark. And then B, people are very keen to tell a positive story, to say that we're having a good moment, that people are back in the art market, and so on. And I can't tell how true that is, because this is kind of why I don't like going to art fairs anymore, is because you just feel like it's such a subjective industry where appearances become reality. And so people are very keen to put on positive appearances. And so when people say we had a good Paris, the vibe is good, the moment is good, I can't tell how real that is. Y'all try and report fairly. We don't have any interest in being negative just for the sake of negativity. Yeah, what do you think's really going on?
Yeah, I pitch that to you, Naomi. What do you make of that? I've been hearing that too from people.
I will proudly take up the mantle of defending our journalism because it's certainly criticism that I've heard every gallery dinner that I go to. I'm sat next to an art advisor or someone who says, oh, is it enough already? Too much negativity about the market. I think there's a sort of anti-media sentiment. It's just bleeding out. I don't know if it's just in London or if that's happening in the US and Germany as well. But generally, people sort of are more and more kind of like, oh, we can't trust the media. And I'm here to tell you that you can. We are reporting, and if you read the stories, like a headline is a headline. We've been writing about the market downturn for the past couple of years because the market is indeed in a downturn. And our reporting is informed by solid secondary market data from the Artnet price database, as well as our reporting on the primary market. And everything that we say is backed up with examples, and we do our best to show our work within a piece. And it's true that overall, the market is doing less trade. Does that mean that everybody is doing terribly? No. Does that mean that some of the middle market is maybe having their best sales year ever? No. But overall, the market is down. According to Artnet's data, which we published in our mid-year intelligence report this year, auction sales are down 29% year over year. Dozens of galleries have closed this year. The latest Art Basel survey of global collecting, which was released last week, and that's Art Basel. So, talk about who's got an interest in the market here. Says that collectors spent roughly a third less on art in 2023 than they did in 2022. So we are reporting the truth, and dealers may not love that. They may fear, creating a vicious cycle, but we're not pulling that out of nowhere.
But it seems like reading your coverage, good vibes was the headline, which I guess my question is, don't people always say they're good vibes?
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
You always find out the year after that people are like, yeah, we sold nothing last year, but the vibes were great. The vibes are great now.
I mean, I think also that because of these, as you just stated, these numbers and averages of expenditures are down, I think people were bracing themselves for fairs that were going to be pretty damaging to them. And it's really expensive to go to a fair, sending your staff, sending your work, standing there for a week. And I think that the fact that they were moving inventory, I do think people were genuine about their optimism. Maybe it bodes well. Maybe the story ends well. Maybe the frothy market is over and there's a time of readjustment and we'll come out of this in a more interesting place. Maybe the art market has dovetailed more with the art discourse or something. Imagine.
Perhaps. I think it was positive, and I think a lot of sales were made. And if you look at the level of the sales, you'll see that both things are true, that it could have been a very good fair, but it's still a worse fair than in previous years. I think in the same Art Basel report on collecting and reports the drop in level of spend, it underlines that median spending has barely changed. So that third drop has happened mostly in the top level of the market. So these kind of
interesting
works that are priced like 50K, they are still moving at pretty much the same pace as they did before. So some parts of the market, some dealers, they might say, actually, we're doing great. We don't recognize this downturn that you're talking about.
The middle market in particular, because it's really the blue chips that might be experiencing this more.
Maybe this is too big for this conversation. Real quick, I just want to know, because you're in conversations I'm not in. I know artist friends I have talked a lot about the politics. So I have a question. There's an economic uncertainty, and then there's some idea that collectors have turned against certain kinds of social justice art, and that people might be waiting for the elections in the United States in order to understand the way the winds are blowing. How much of a part of this do you think that is? Is that real?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think that it's a bunch of different things are, a confluence of issues that are flowing together. You probably would agree, Naomi. I don't know that you can pick out one kind of macro element and say this is what's causing it.
Years of the market froth and speculation where trendy painting was being pumped out like nobody is tomorrow. It may be that there's a little bit of a fatigue with that now, and speculators have exited the market. It will be interesting to see how things change, if at all, after the election. And obviously, a very important moment for the market is the auctions in New York as well. And I think that we will have a clearer picture, for better or for worse, after those two things.
Yes, well, the election is coming up very soon in the States, and that is sort of where we get to Elon, who's not running for the U.S.
Musk.
presidency, thank God, but he's definitely in orbit of former President Donald Trump. that's not what we're here to talk about because we're an art publication. But he has been, as I said at the top of the episode, in some trouble with some sci-fi movie producers. Ben, can you explain what Elon's doing now?
Yeah,
What's Elon doing now?
I can do my best. You know, I'm on X. I'm an Elon fanboy. I'm
I secretly look at X too. Don't tell anyone.
I'm re-Xing all his X's. Yeah, Elon Musk in the news because he was at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally this last Sunday, where he sported his new dark Gothic MAGA look and talked about the need for a new Department of Government Efficiency that would radically chop government spending, which in my head, I'm like, dude, your entire fortune is based on tax breaks for luxury vehicles from the government. I mean, come on. But, we're not talking about him exactly in the political register, but he's been in the cultural news because in mid-October, he had this big product launch event called We Robot, where he debuted his new robot named Optimus, which is supposedly a fully autonomous robot, and not, as it was when he last debuted a robot, just a guy in a robot suit, plus his Cybercab and Robovan, which are supposedly his play at creating fully autonomous vehicles. And two things happened. One is that the director of the movie I, Robot posted to X, essentially, doing side-by-side images of the new products, the robots, the cars, with the movie I, Robot, and saying, dude, you ripped off my designs. Really talented designers worked on this movie, and you ripped off those designs. iRobot worked with Audi, the car company, to design the fake cars and that. So it's kind of like Tesla ripping off Audi. But more significantly than that, because after all, the event was called We Robot, so maybe that inspiration is not so secret. The producers of Blade Runner 2049, the science fiction movie, actually did file a claim against him because apparently he asked to use their images and they said no. And then in a crazy move, they just used artificial intelligence to generate an image that looks kind of like a still of Ryan Gosling in Blade Runner 2049. And if you watch the clip, Elon Musk is literally just I love Blade Runner, but I don't think we want that future. Maybe we want the great duster jacket he has, but not that future. We want my future. So it's not ambiguous that he's referencing this movie. It's supposed to look like that, but it's one of those melted looking AI images. And they said no. So they're suing him, saying that it's a bad faith and intentionally malicious gambit designed to make Tesla more attractive to a global audience by attracting it with this movie stuff. That's a lot of just mind-melted stuff. Naomi and Kate, what do you think?
They're suing for $150,000 in damages, right? I was thinking about this, he's a smart guy. There's many negative things one can say about Elon, but he's intelligent and he runs many multinational corporations. He knows what law is and how to get around it.
I don't know.
Okay, that's a different conversation, but we'll talk about that offline. But my point is that $150,000 in fees, one could say, to get to just use this art is probably a worthwhile expenditure to someone with that kind of a net worth in a way.
I wanted to chime in here, actually. I was watching a sci-fi movie over the weekend, and I spotted a third lookalike. I was watching Total Recall, the original one with the Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Great film.
Wild ride of a film. And I will say that the cars in there, the cabs of the cars, are total lookalikes for the Tesla Cybertruck, the one that's people are driving and the raccoons can't get into because it looks like a big garbage can. But anyway, what I think is interesting about this story, and I think sort of speaks to what you're just saying, Kate, how, it encapsulates a little bit about what has happened with artificial intelligence and the public imagination in recent years. Every time a new, widely, publicly accessible AI tech is unveiled, whether it's that sort of text-to-image translation with DALL-E, however impressive it actually is, it tends to be clouded over by the sort of sheer power of the public imagination who have seen these kind of fantasies of AI play out in science fiction. And, they're imagining a general artificial intelligence that doesn't actually exist yet. And I think Elon Musk, along with every other company who is now sort of claiming to be an AI company, is profiting off of that, the power of the imagination of what does not actually exist yet. It's smart. They're just sort of using that to sell cars.
Exactly. So yeah, 150,000 in copyright infringement to sort of ease the public by triggering familiar images and artworks that they will help them understand the vision that he's trying to put forward, although there's definitely different ones about what AI will bring.
Ease the public, though. I mean, I, Robot, the movie, is about killer robots. I mean, the crazy thing is that that's a thing that drives me nuts, is this harvesting of dystopian sci-fi for its aesthetics, but abstracting it from its like moral lessons is just so characteristic. But I think your point
so characteristic of art too, though.
Well, that's true. I suppose the stakes are less, and the distinction is ever narrower.
Yeah, I mean, these are all dystopias. He's using the aesthetics. I mean, before the dystopian story plays out, these future that are depicted are utopias, right? So he's saying, like, we got this utopian future technology. You know, what could go wrong?
Well, but to go back to something you said in the last section, Naomi, I do think there's an aspect to some of this you might think of just as a troll. Clearly, a thing that has happened in the last 8 years is a certain kind of very wealthy class of people on the platforms that they own and are addicted to, on the technology platforms of the internet that many of them made their fortunes from, are exposed to new forms of criticism and have clearly radicalized themselves and have really turned on the media. Like you just mentioned this. And I think to a certain extent, legally, I don't know what footing we're on with these things, because I think there's people are inspired by all kinds of things, and it's really hard to know what significant transformation is. The fact that he asked for permission, they said no, and then he just created a replica is pretty telling. But there's a case to be made that he's just willing to pay the fine or the price for the free publicity of a battle with like the cultural elites. And that's what gets his Cybertruck loving fans going. I mean, I think they really feed off of a sense that they're like anti-elite, even though he's the richest man in the world and stumping for a guy who's been the president of the United States once already. Like, there's something going on there, right? I mean, I think it's not accidental. It's deliberate poke.
One of the biggest stories this year in the past few years, since, AI has gotten as strong as it has been copyright infringement for artists and graphic designers. I think that we now know like where Elon's ethics stand. I mean, I think it was just last week, there was an open letter signed by Amako Bofo, this very famous painter, and other famous artists. 11,000 people signed it, decrying the use of their work to train AI. So the producers of these films are of a certain stature, but this is like a huge issue that is affecting all levels of the creative sphere.
Oh my goodness. And I guess I've been meaning to write an essay, but there's so much going on about Trump as the candidate of AI art, because he really is. He really is. I mean, he constantly is posting like AI memes of himself, like himself as, like a football player, just fever dreams of, like what the United States will look like if Kamala wins. And it's like, they look like this Elon Musk thing. They look kind of melted, but that's clearly part of the point. It's just like, I'm using AI. If you can dream it, you can do it, and don't tell me to regulate it. And so the technological conversation has really organized itself along political and cultural lines in this kind of like dark way.
If you can hallucinate it, you can hallucinate it. We should wrap up, and I actually really think you should write that essay, because that is a really compelling argument. This has been disconcerting on some levels.
Yeah. Disconcerting. A lot to think about.
Also great. It's nice to chat with you guys as always. Naomi, it's nice to have you on the podcast. And again, congratulations from me, and I'm sure Ben too, for the newly announced title of editor-in-chief. So well deserved.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm always happy to bring the disconcerting vibes to the podcast anytime.
Well, that just called being a good editor.
Indeed. That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you could subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili and Carolyn Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.